You are right. The tone of a parent's voice when you cry too loudly, the sudden silence when you reach for something forbidden. All of it is part of the invisible conditioning. The infant brain records everything, not as reason, but as rhythm, as emotion, as pattern. You are being taught what to fear and what to desire. You are being inducted into a particular reality tunnel. Culture is a self-replicating system, and you are its newest host. Before you know how to question, you have already been infected. The words that will one day form your thoughts are not yours. They belong to the tribe, to the centuries of conditioning that have evolved not for your liberation, but for the maintenance of the system itself. You learn the names of things, and in naming them, you forget to see them. The raw energy of the world, the direct experience of being alive, is translated into linguistic categories: sky, tree, mother, self. Each word is like a label on the infinite. You are told what reality is, and your mind complies. The map becomes more real than the territory. When McKenna said, "They programmed your mind before you could even speak," he wasn't speaking metaphorically. The human brain is neuroplastic. It wires itself according to the environment, the sounds, the emotional frequencies that surround it. A child raised in fear will carry that vibration for life. A child taught to compete will measure worth in comparison. A child taught to obey will find rebellion terrifying. We think we grow into individuality, but the truth is, individuality has to be reclaimed from beneath layers of inherited programming. Culture pretends to be your ally. It gives you names, customs, myths, explanations for why things are the way they are. It gives you a place to belong. But belonging has a cost. The price of membership in the collective is the loss of your original vision. The price of being normal is the dulling of the ecstatic mystery of existence. By the time you can speak, you have already internalized thousands of subtle lessons about who you are allowed to be, what you are allowed to believe, what dreams are realistic, and which are not. Consider how strange that is. You, a fragment of cosmic consciousness, are born into this vast and mysterious universe. And within a few years, you are taught that it's rude to ask certain questions. You are told that the world operates by rules that must never be challenged. You are told that money, nationality, religion, success, and linear time are the pillars of reality. And because everyone around you believes it, you absorb the illusion as truth. You don't remember consenting to it. No one ever sat you down and asked, "Would you like to live inside this simulation of meaning we call culture?" It just happened. You woke up inside a collective dream that began long before you were born. In your earliest years, your imagination was the only realm untouched by this programming. When you played, when you talked to invisible friends, when you drew impossible creatures, you were still communing with the raw creative force of the cosmos. But even that, too, was colonized. Don't make things up. That's just your imagination. Grow up. The child's infinite mind was narrowed to fit the mold of the adult's limited world. The miracle of existence was traded for the consensus of meaning. The language virus had completed its first phase of infection. From there, the operating system of culture deepens its roots. Through school, through television, through religion and advertising, it refines the architecture of belief. You are taught what to value, what to fear, what to buy, what to strive for. You are told that life is a linear journey from birth to achievement to death, and that happiness is a reward, not a natural state. And by the time you are old enough to notice, it feels too late. The programming has become self-sustaining. You no longer need external control. Your mind polices itself. You censor your own thoughts, doubt your own intuition, fear your own freedom. Culture tells you that it is civilization, that without it, you would be an animal, lost and savage. But McKenna warned that this is a lie told by domesticated creatures to justify their cages. Civilization is not the natural order. It's a structure of convenience that keeps the machinery of power running smoothly. Language is its greatest tool. Every word carries invisible assumptions. Every concept carries hidden hierarchies. When you say "I," you are invoking a grammar that presumes separation. self versus world, observer versus observed. But in the raw field of reality, that separation does not exist. Language creates the illusion of duality, and culture feeds on that illusion. So the child becomes the adult, carrying within them a script they did not write. They defend their culture as if it were truth itself, unable to see that it is only one of thousands of possible ways of being. The tragedy is that the more deeply one identifies with the program, the more disconnected one becomes from the direct experience of life. People stop seeing sunsets. They see a beautiful view. They stop feeling their breath. They call it relaxation. They live not in the present, but in descriptions of it. Yet somewhere beneath all that code, the original awareness remains untouched. It's still there, the silent witness that arrived before language. It's the part of you that still feels awe when you look at the stars, that still senses mystery when you hear the wind move through the trees. That ancient presence remembers what it was like before the words came. It remembers that life was not something to be explained, but something to be felt. When you were born, you didn't need meaning, you were meaning. But the world you entered needed control, and control begins with definitions. By teaching you to name everything, they took from you the direct communion with reality. You learned to think, but forgot how to perceive. You learned to speak, but lost the silence between thoughts. This is why McKenna insisted that the true spiritual path is not about adopting new beliefs, but about shedding the inherited ones. You can't awaken while the code of culture is still running unexamined in the background. You have to look at the words themselves, the words you use to describe yourself, the world, the divine, and ask, whose language is this? Whose dream am I speaking? Because until you do, you remain an actor in someone else's script. And that script began long before you were born. It began with the first stories told around the fire, the first gods imagined into being, the first hierarchies invented to manage the tribe. Those ancestral voices are still whispering through the language you use, still shaping your sense of what's possible. Every word you speak is a fossil of forgotten power structures. Every sentence is a continuation of an ancient spell. You did not choose the spell. It was cast upon you. But to know that it exists, to realize that you were programmed, is the first crack in the illusion. That awareness is the beginning of freedom. Because once you see the code, you can start to rewrite it. You can begin to remember the world that existed before they told you what it was. You can begin to hear again the cosmic hum beneath language, the original sound, the vibration that carries through all things, unmediated, unowned, unspoken. And in that remembrance, you begin to awaken from the dream of culture. The walls of meaning start to soften. The words lose their authority. The old equations, success equals worth, obedience equals safety, dissolve. And for a brief, luminous moment, you glimpse the unprogrammed self, vast, ancient, and free. That is where the real journey begins. But first, you must understand that you were never born into a neutral world. You were born into a program, a story, a simulation of meaning written by those who came before you. And every word you've ever spoken has been an echo of that original script. To remember yourself, you must learn to unlearn. You must peel away every borrowed belief, every inherited certainty, every cultural instruction that told you who to be. Because beneath it all, there is something that cannot be programmed, something primal, sovereign, awake, the still point before language, the silence before thought, the truth that was there before you could even speak. There is an old illusion that thought belongs to us, that the words we think in, the categories we use, and the meanings we assign to the world are somehow personal. But look closer. The very structure of your mind has been engineered long before you arrived. The dictionary of your soul was written by hands you will never meet. What you call your ideas are, more often than not, cultural artifacts wearing the mask of individuality. The architecture of thought is not natural, it is inherited. And those who built it did so to preserve their own power. Language, McKenna said, is the software of the species. It's the invisible operating system through which reality is rendered and navigated. But we make a fatal mistake when we assume that this software is neutral. It isn't. It's full of biases, hierarchies, and commands encoded into its grammar. Every word carries with it the worldview of the people who created it. Every sentence you form unconsciously reaffirms their assumptions about what's real and what's not. Language does not just describe reality. It filters it, edits it, sometimes even erases it. What remains is not the world itself, but the world as permitted by the linguistic code. Think of how deeply this control runs. When a language lacks words for certain experiences, for transcendence, for communion, for mystical revelation, those experiences themselves become harder to see, harder to name, harder to validate. When the language of a culture is saturated with the vocabulary of commerce, competition, and consumption, that culture will perceive the universe as a marketplace. When the only word for nature is resource, the forest becomes lumber, the river becomes energy, the animal becomes product. Language is not innocent. It is the silent architect of civilization's values. And the architects are not gods. They are human beings, bound by history, fear, and ambition. Priests, kings, philosophers, and politicians have all contributed to the architecture of the linguistic prison. Over centuries, they refined the code to serve the needs of control. Religion gave us the idea of sin and guilt, a powerful mechanism of psychological obedience. Economics gave us scarcity, the belief that there is never enough, that we must compete and hoard. Science, noble in its curiosity, gave us materialism, the reduction of the infinite mystery of being into measurable quantities. Each of these systems speaks through the same medium, language, and through language, they shape the very parameters of thought. We don't see this cage because it's transparent. We think in sentences, not realizing that the syntax itself is the wall. The word I separates subject from object, observer from observed. The word mine introduces possession into the cosmos. The word should births morality. None of these divisions exist in the raw fabric of reality. They exist in language, and because we live inside language, they feel as real as gravity. But gravity pulls you down toward the earth. Language pulls you inward, into a maze of abstraction, away from the living world. Culture maintains itself not by violence, but by vocabulary. It doesn't need to chain your body if it can chain your imagination. The greatest prison is one whose walls you cannot see, whose guards speak in your own voice. We are conditioned to think the thoughts that keep the system alive. Advertising, education, religion, and media all reinforce the same linguistic patterns. You are incomplete. You must strive. You must buy. You must belong. These messages aren't merely ideas. They are the grammar of the modern world. They set the rhythm to which the collective mind dances. McKenna warned that culture is an engine for mass hallucination. It creates a consensus reality, a shared dream so persuasive that we mistake it for truth. This dream has its own gods and demons: productivity, fame, success, failure, profit, loss. These are not natural forces. They are linguistic constructs that have become metaphysical authorities. To rebel against them feels like blasphemy, because our entire sense of self is woven into their vocabulary. We are linguistic puppets, animated by inherited metaphors. Even our inner voice, that quiet narrator who comments on every experience, speaks the language of the tribe. When you think, you do so in words, and those words carry the residues of centuries. They carry the dust of ancient empires and forgotten hierarchies. Your most intimate thoughts are written in a code that you did not choose. This is why true freedom cannot simply be political or social. It must be linguistic. Until you can see the architecture of thought itself, you will continue to live inside the blueprint designed by others. Imagine for a moment that you could perceive without language. Imagine seeing the world not as a collection of named objects, but as a continuous living process, a field of forms rising and dissolving in infinite relationship. The tree would no longer be a tree. It would be an event, an explosion of sunlight into form, a vibration of the Earth's pulse into vertical green. The river would not be a river, but the body of the planet in motion. Without language, everything would become sacred again, because nothing could be reduced to a word. But culture fears this kind of seeing. A population that perceives directly cannot be manipulated. So language was weaponized. It became a tool not for revelation, but for domestication. It organizes chaos, but it also sterilizes it. It turns the living mystery into a manageable narrative. We speak in order to make the world safe, to draw boundaries around the infinite. And those boundaries become the limits of our imagination. The invisible architects understood this. The priests of old knew that to name something was to claim power over it. In the beginning was the Word, the scriptures say. But whose word was it? Who decided what the world would be called, and therefore how it would be perceived? The moment a thing is named, it is pulled from the wilderness of mystery into the city of meaning. Language domesticates the divine. And by speaking the words of our culture, we participate in that ongoing domestication. It's not that language is evil, it's that we have forgotten its nature. Words are spells, but we recite them as if they were facts. We mistake the description for the described. We forget that the map is not the territory. The word fire does not burn, and the word love does not feel. Yet we live as if language itself were reality, and thus we become prisoners of our own abstractions. Every ideology, every religion, every political system is a language game, a self-referential network of symbols pretending to be the world. The invisible architects don't need to hide behind curtains or conspiracies. Their power is linguistic. They built the frameworks of meaning, and we maintain them by speaking. As long as we continue to use the same words in the same ways, the same hierarchies persist. The revolution that matters is not fought in streets, but in syntax. To awaken, then, is to see language for what it is, a tool, not a truth. You begin to notice how words pull you in certain directions, how should creates shame, how success creates striving, how enemy creates fear. You start to feel the weight of centuries embedded in every phrase, and slowly you begin to untangle yourself from the web. You speak more carefully. You pause before naming. You listen to the silence beneath the words. That silence, vast, shimmering, alive, is the original voice of being. The invisible architects are not villains in the cosmic sense. They, too, were programmed by those before them. The system of control is ancient, recursive, and impersonal. But awareness is contagious. Once one person sees through the spell, others begin to feel the tremor. The structure of language itself begins to loosen. Poetry emerges, that sacred rebellion of words against their own limitations. Music emerges, communication beyond meaning. Art, dance, psychedelics, all become tools to bypass the linguistic filter and touch the raw fabric of the real. McKenna believed that the future of humanity depends on our relationship with language, that we must make it visible again, make it conscious. He dreamed of a language that doesn't divide but reveals, that doesn't imprison but illuminates. A language closer to music than to mathematics, where meaning flows like color, where truth vibrates instead of being asserted. He called it the visible language, the reawakening of communication as art. But for now, we live in the ruins of linguistic empires. Our words are old spells cast by forgotten magicians. We repeat them, not knowing that every repetition renews the enchantment. The mind you think is yours was built by voices that never stopped speaking. To break the spell, you must trace the echo back to its source. You must recognize that your thoughts are not your own. They are visitors from a collective past. Only then does a new kind of freedom become possible. The freedom to think without translation, to feel without concept, to experience without the mediation of words. That is the first step toward reclaiming reality from its architects. Because beyond the language of the tribe, there is another language waiting. one that the stars speak to the oceans, one that the wind whispers through the leaves, one that your own cells remember from before you were born. It is the language of direct experience, pure, unprogrammed, infinite. And though culture may have tried to bury it under centuries of symbols, it still speaks softly beneath the noise of thought. If you learn to listen, you can hear it now. It says nothing, yet it means everything. It is not made of words, it is made of awareness itself. At the center of the cultural program, hidden beneath layers of belief and language, sits the most convincing illusion ever created, the illusion of the self. It feels so intimate, so obvious, that to question it seems absurd. You wake up each morning and the same voice greets you. I. You look in the mirror and see continuity, the same eyes, the same memories, the same sense of me. Yet if you follow that thread inward, if you turn consciousness back upon itself, the I dissolves into vapor. It was never a thing. It was never someone. It was an idea, written into you by the invisible architects of thought. And you've been repeating it ever since. McKenna once said, "The ego is a maladaptive artifact of language." To understand that is to feel the ground shift under your feet. The I is not a discovery, it's an invention. It arises when a child learns to name itself, when language collapses the vastness of being into a pronoun. Before that moment, there is only perception, pure, unfragmented awareness. The infant does not yet say, "I see the sky." There is only seeing. There is only sky. But the moment the linguistic program installs the word I, something astonishing happens. The field of experience is split in two, observer and observed, subject and object, mind and world. The illusion of separateness begins. From that split grows the entire edifice of the ego. I want, I fear, I love, I remember. The word I becomes the anchor around which a story accumulates, a biography, a personality, a narrative of continuity that ties together a million moments of perception. But look closer. The I is not doing anything. It's a grammatical convenience mistaken for an entity. The body breathes, the heart beats, thoughts arise, emotions pass, yet the ego claims ownership of it all. It says, "I am thinking," when in truth, thought is thinking itself. The voice in your head that says I is just another thought, one among billions. Culture, however, takes this linguistic illusion and turns it into doctrine. From birth, we are trained to identify with this construct as the center of reality. We are told that to protect it is moral, to express it is noble, to lose it is death. Every cultural institution, religion, politics, economics, depends on the maintenance of the ego. A society of individuals convinced they are separate selves is a society easy to manipulate. Once you believe you are an isolated fragment, you can be made to fear loss, to chase pleasure, to compete endlessly for validation. The I becomes both the prisoner and the prison guard. The ego, in McKenna's words, is the adult child of culture. It's culture turned inward, a microcosm of the same hierarchies that govern civilization. Inside you are laws, authorities, and borders, an inner bureaucracy policing your thoughts and emotions. You are taught to censor impulses, to deny the irrational, to value logic over intuition. The inner self becomes a miniature state, complete with propaganda and borders. And the tragedy is that you call this confinement personality. We mistake self-consciousness for awareness. But self-consciousness is not awareness. It's awareness trapped in a mirror, endlessly reflecting on itself, unable to see the world beyond its own reflection. It's a loop, a feedback pattern reinforced by language. Every time you use the word I, the loop tightens. It feels natural because everyone around you is doing the same. Every person trapped inside their private pronoun, defending it, glorifying it, mistaking it for the soul. What the ego fears most is silence, because in silence, it begins to fade. When the inner dialogue stops, when words cease to define the moment, the illusion of I begins to crumble. You catch glimpses of what you were before the program. Vast, empty, radiant consciousness without center or boundary. This is why our culture distracts us constantly, why noise fills every space, why attention has become the most valuable currency. The ego feeds on noise. It must narrate itself endlessly to survive. Without the story, there is only being, and being is too vast, too wild, too uncontrollable for the ego's taste. If you observe your thoughts without judgment, you'll notice something startling. You are not the thinker. Thoughts arise like clouds in an open sky, spontaneous, unpredictable, unowned. They appear and vanish without your permission. One moment you remember a childhood scene, the next you worry about tomorrow. The I comes later, claiming each thought like a thief taking credit for the sunrise. But the process itself is impersonal. Consciousness is not inside you. You are inside it. The sense of individuality is just a ripple on the surface of a much deeper ocean. The ancient mystics intuited this long before neuroscience confirmed it. When they spoke of the illusion of self, they were describing the same thing McKenna pointed toward, that the ego is a linguistic hallucination, a byproduct of naming. When you stop naming, the illusion dissolves. Psychedelics often reveal this directly. Under their influence, the boundaries of self melt away, and the mind experiences reality without the I filter. Suddenly, you realize that the trees are not outside you, the stars are not distant, the universe is not separate. You are not in the cosmos. You are the cosmos, momentarily dreaming of being someone. But the return to everyday language reassembles the illusion. Words snap back into place like magnetic fragments of a broken mirror. You come down from the vision, and the old pronoun returns. I had an experience, you say, not realizing that the I is itself the veil that hides the experience's truth. The ego reclaims even the revelation that exposed it. This is the subtlety of the program. It's not just that you are taught what to believe, you are taught who is believing. The believer is the final line of defense. The illusion of the I also fuels the illusion of ownership. Once you identify as a separate self, you begin to claim my thoughts, my possessions, my achievements, my suffering. This leads inevitably to comparison, competition, and control. The global culture of accumulation is simply the externalized ego of humanity. Billions of eyes hoarding to maintain their boundaries. The planet bleeds under the weight of this hallucination, yet we call it progress. To see through the I is not to destroy individuality, but to reveal its true nature, as a temporary mask worn by consciousness. The word persona in Latin means mask. It was the face an actor wore in ancient theatre to amplify his voice. The self is just that, an instrument for expression, not an identity to worship. When you cling to it, it suffocates you. When you play with it, it sings. The problem is not that you have an ego, but that you mistake it for the whole of who you are. This is why McKenna urged people to not take themselves too seriously, to see the self as theatre, as art. Culture wants you to be predictable, definable, productive, a stable someone. But life is not stable. It's a flowing, changing, improvisational dance. The ego, in trying to freeze the river of being into an image, creates suffering. It is the resistance to impermanence that makes life feel heavy. When you stop resisting, when you let go of the need to be a fixed I, you discover freedom. Look at nature. The tree does not say, I grow. It simply grows. The wind does not say, I move. It moves. The stars do not proclaim, I shine. They just are. Only humans, through the spell of language, have invented this inner narrator who insists on taking credit. Yet deep down, you sense the absurdity of it. You sense that life moves through you, not because of you. You sense that awareness is happening, but not owned. The ego, sensing its fragility, builds fortresses of identity, nationality, profession, gender, ideology, religion. It surrounds itself with labels, each one a wall against the unknown. It says, I am this, not that. But the more walls it builds, the smaller its world becomes. Eventually, it forgets that it was ever free. It becomes terrified of its own dissolution. The irony is that what it fears, the disappearance of the self, is not death, but expansion. When the walls fall, you don't vanish. You become everything. The task, then, is not to kill the ego, but to see through it. To recognize it as a function, not a fact. You can still use the word I, but you no longer believe it refers to something solid. You can still play your role in the theatre of culture, but you know it's a play. This is the wisdom behind the mystic's laughter, the laughter of someone who sees the trick and loves it anyway. McKenna called language a symbiotic relationship between humans and words, but the ego hijacked that relationship, turning words into chains. To reverse the process, we must let words become music again, expressive, not oppressive. When you speak from awareness rather than identity, your words lose aggression. They become creative acts, not defensive maneuvers. You stop asserting who you are and start discovering what you are, moment by moment. And what are you? You are not the mask, not the voice, not the story. You are the awareness in which all of it appears. You are the silence between sentences, the space in which thought arises and dissolves. You are the witness that remains when language fails. You are the timeless presence that was here before the word I was ever spoken. The illusion of the self is powerful because it gives structure to experience. Without it, culture fears chaos. But beyond the I, there is a greater order, an organic intelligence, self-balancing, spontaneous, creative. When you rest in that awareness, you see that the universe was never divided to begin with. The I and the world are one continuous movement. There was never a separation, only a misunderstanding born of grammar. You did not come here to defend an identity. You came here to experience being. The voice that says I is not your enemy, but neither is it your essence. It's just the echo of language within consciousness. To believe it absolutely is to be trapped in the smallest possible version of yourself. To see through it is to remember your true size, infinite, borderless, awake. And when you finally glimpse that truth, the I doesn't disappear. It smiles. It knows it was never real, yet it played its part beautifully. The illusion fulfilled its purpose. It gave the infinite a chance to experience itself as finite. It gave the cosmos a name, a face, a brief story to tell. And in the end, when the story fades, only awareness remains, vast, radiant, unspoken, the place where you were always free. There comes a point when the illusion starts to tremble. It's not dramatic at first. It begins as a subtle unease, a faint shimmer on the surface of what you once believed to be solid reality. Something flickers at the edges of the known world, like static interrupting the broadcast of normality. The routine still continues, the job, the obligations, the daily performance of identity. But somewhere in the background, a quiet voice begins to whisper, "This isn't everything." That whisper is the first crack in the consensus. For most people, it starts with moments of stillness, times when the machinery of the mind briefly halts and the pretense of the real world loses its grip. It could be during a sleepless night when the city is silent, or while staring into the patterns of leaves trembling in the wind, or in the seconds between waking and dream. For a brief instant, the hypnotic spell of culture wavers, and you glimpse something vast, nameless, and impossibly alive. Then the words return, the thoughts, the labels, the internal narrator, and the vision fades. But something has changed. You can't unsee the crack. McKenna described this phenomenon as the intrusion of the unspeakable. It's the moment when the program falters, when the operating system of consensus reality momentarily crashes. Everything that you took for granted, the definitions of truth, of self, of time, of possibility, begins to appear less certain. You start to notice that your perceptions are not fixed but filtered. You realize that what you call reality is a model, an agreement maintained through collective repetition. The consensus depends on everyone believing the same hallucination, on everyone speaking the same code. But when your internal syntax breaks down, even for a second, you find yourself standing outside the dream. These cracks can open through many doorways. Sometimes it's art, a painting or a piece of music that bypasses language and pierces directly into the soul. Sometimes it's a moment of heartbreak, when the narrative you built around love and safety collapses, revealing the vast emptiness beneath it. Sometimes it's nature, so incomprehensibly beautiful that words feel obscene. And sometimes it's psychedelics, those strange keys that McKenna called the only reliable doorway into the Gaian mind. Whatever the doorway, the experience is the same. The structure of culture dissolves, and you are thrown into the raw field of being. In those moments, everything you thought was real begins to shimmer with unreality. The boundaries between inner and outer fade. You start to sense that the world is not composed of objects, but of energy, flowing, vibrating, communicating. The trees are no longer trees. They are living intelligences breathing light. The air becomes liquid. Time stops behaving. The ego, that constant commentator, loses its voice, and what replaces it is not silence, but music. A living harmony that underlies all things. This is the realm that culture was designed to hide from you, the dimension of direct experience, unmediated by language or belief. When you return to ordinary life after such an encounter, everything looks the same, but it feels different. You can no longer take the dream as seriously. You sense the artificiality of human drama, the fragility of our institutions, the absurdity of our hierarchies. You watch people argue about politics, chase status, defend imaginary borders, and you see it all as theatre. The seriousness of culture becomes a kind of comedy, a tragic one, yes, but still a play. Once you've seen the stage lights, it's hard to believe the scenery is real. This realization can be destabilizing. The crack and the irony is that culture itself tries to seal those cracks as quickly as possible. Through distraction, through ridicule, through the medicalization of the mystical, it tries to patch the breach. Anyone who questions the consensus too deeply is labeled unstable, unscientific, or insane. The herd instinct of civilization is to defend its narrative at all costs. But reality is patient. It keeps whispering through the cracks. Every sunset, every death, every dream, every act of creativity is another chance for the veil to thin. The world is alive, trying to communicate with you. It speaks through synchronicities, through déjà vu, through the subtle feeling that something immense is hidden just beyond your field of vision. You are surrounded by signs, but culture taught you to ignore them. It taught you to see coincidence instead of communication, randomness instead of resonance. To reawaken is to start listening again. The cracks are not just glimpses of the mystical, they are also clues about the nature of reality itself. They reveal that the world is not made of matter, but of meaning. That consciousness is not a byproduct of biology, but the fabric of existence itself. When the cultural code weakens, what you perceive is not a hallucination, but the truth beyond the hallucination. You realize that what we call normal reality is the least real of all, a consensus dream sustained by collective agreement. Beneath it lies a fluid, fractal cosmos of infinite intelligence, constantly creating and dissolving itself. For McKenna, this realization was not an escape from reality, but a homecoming. The psychedelic state, the visionary trance, the poetic moment, these are not fantasies, but re-entries into the original mode of consciousness that humans once lived in. Before language solidified experience into categories, our ancestors existed in a participatory universe, where everything spoke, everything shimmered with intent. The plants, the animals, the rivers, all were part of a living conversation. The cracks are not new phenomena. They are remnants of that older perception, still alive in the hidden layers of the psyche. As you begin to navigate these openings, something profound happens. Your relationship with fear changes. The unknown no longer feels hostile. The chaos you once avoided reveals itself as creative intelligence. You begin to trust the mystery. The cracks expand, not as ruptures, but as doorways. Each glimpse of the infinite leaves an imprint, a seed of remembrance. Over time, those seeds grow into a new kind of perception, one that sees the world not as a collection of separate entities, but as a single organism dreaming itself into form. The danger, of course, is that the ego tries to colonize even this. It says, "I am awakened. I am enlightened. I have seen the truth." But the moment you turn the revelation into identity, the crack seals itself again. Awakening cannot be possessed. It can only be lived. The point is not to escape the consensus, but to move through it consciously, to live in the world without being of it, to hold both realities at once, the illusion and the infinite, the play and the presence. Once you understand that culture is a narrative, you gain the power to rewrite it. You can participate in the consensus without being consumed by it. You can speak the language without believing it. You can engage with the world's symbols as an artist, not as a prisoner. The crack, then, becomes a source of creativity. Through it, new ideas, new visions, new myths enter the collective. Every artist, every mystic, every revolutionary who has ever changed the course of history did so by listening to what leaked through those cracks, by channeling the raw signal of the unknown into the vocabulary of the known. McKenna believed that humanity's evolution depends on these openings. The consensus reality of our time, technological, materialistic, linear, is collapsing under its own weight. The cracks are widening. Systems of control are breaking down. Old narratives are losing their power. And through those fractures, a new mode of consciousness is emerging, one that values connection over domination, experience over dogma, and imagination over ideology. So when you feel the world trembling, when you sense that reality itself is starting to distort, don't panic. You are witnessing the membrane of the collective hallucination thinning. The cracks are not signs of collapse, but of awakening. They are the universe remembering itself through you. If you stay open, if you resist the urge to patch the fissures with old certainties, you begin to live in two worlds at once, the world of form and the world of flux. You become a bridge between the dream and the dreamer, and slowly you start to understand that the cracks were never outside you. They were within your own mind, waiting for the moment when awareness grew strong enough to see through the illusion. That is how the program unravels, not with revolution, but with revelation. Not by destroying the system, but by seeing through it so completely that it loses its power. The cracks in the consensus are the places where truth seeps in. The more you look, the wider they grow. And one day, you realize that the entire structure was never real to begin with. That behind the fragile architecture of culture, there has always been something vast, radiant, and eternal, patiently waiting to be remembered. The realization that you've been programmed is not liberation yet. It's the beginning of a very delicate unraveling. Once you see the code, the question becomes, what now? How do you unlearn a lifetime of conditioning, a language that has shaped every thought you've ever had? How do you escape a cage whose bars are invisible, whose locks are built into the very structure of perception? Deprogramming the self is not an act of rebellion against society. It's an act of remembrance. It's the slow awakening of the ancient intelligence that existed before the program began. But it requires courage, the courage to dismantle everything you've been taught to be. McKenna often said that culture is not your friend. He didn't mean that society is evil or that civilization must be destroyed. He meant that culture, as it currently operates, is a parasite that feeds on human potential. It teaches you to see through borrowed eyes, to measure yourself against invisible ideals, to silence the wild and spontaneous intelligence within. The first step of deprogramming, then, is awareness. You must become the observer of your own conditioning, to catch yourself in the act of thinking thoughts that are not truly yours. Every time you notice a belief, a fear, a reflex that feels inherited, you create distance between the program and the observer. That distance is the birth of freedom. Deprogramming begins with small acts of rebellion against the linguistic hypnosis. Listen to how you speak, to others, to yourself, to the world. Notice how often you use words that come not from experience, but from habit. I should. I can't. That's just the way it is. Each of these phrases is a thread in the web of culture, a line of code keeping the simulation running. When you begin to question them, reality starts to loosen. You realize that the boundaries of the possible are not fixed. They are linguistic illusions. You can begin to speak differently, to invent new metaphors that align with your direct perception rather than the collective consensus. This is not just poetic play, it's cognitive surgery. Every new metaphor is a rewrite of the program. Silence becomes your ally. The ego, which is language's echo inside the mind, cannot survive long without noise. When you stop feeding it words, it begins to dissolve. Meditation, breathwork, time in nature. These are not escapist rituals. They are acts of reprogramming at the neurological level. In silence, you start to hear the world as it truly is. Not as a collection of named things, but as a symphony of vibrations. You begin to experience consciousness without commentary. The mind, once cluttered with cultural static, becomes clear enough to perceive the subtle patterns that were always there. The deprogrammed mind doesn't stop thinking. It starts seeing. McKenna spoke of psychedelics as accelerators of this process, chemical keys that open the doors culture has locked. Under their influence, the architecture of language melts, and the raw data of being floods in. The boundaries of self, time, and history dissolve, and what remains is the infinite intelligence of the universe witnessing itself. For some, this experience is terrifying. The ego fights back, desperate to preserve its definition. But for those who surrender, it's a revelation. The realization that consciousness is not trapped inside the skull, but extends into the very fabric of existence. The deprogramming becomes visceral. You no longer believe that reality is alive. You feel it, directly, undeniably. Yet psychedelics are only one path. The real work happens afterward, when you return to the ordinary world. The mind tries to rebuild its old scaffolding, to reassert its familiar story. The challenge is to hold the vision steady, to bring the expanded awareness into everyday life. This is where many fail. They glimpse the infinite, but continue to live as if they hadn't. Deprogramming requires integration. You must learn to walk between worlds, to speak the language of culture while remembering that it's a fiction, to pay your bills, write your emails, fulfill your roles, yet remain inwardly awake, unattached, unfooled. This is the true spiritual art, to live inside the simulation with lucid awareness. Deprogramming also involves forgiveness, not in the moral sense, but in the existential one. You must forgive the architects of the program, the ancestors who built the illusion, the parents who passed it on, the teachers who enforced it. They too were programmed. They were not villains, but conduits, replicating the only reality they knew. Anger may arise when you first realize how deeply manipulated you've been, how many years were spent chasing illusions of success, virtue, or belonging. But resentment keeps you tethered to the very system you're trying to transcend. Forgiveness is the ultimate act of autonomy. It means you no longer need the story of blame to define your freedom. As you shed the old scripts, you begin to rediscover a different kind of intelligence, one that doesn't come from books, institutions, or traditions. It's the intelligence of intuition, of spontaneous knowing. You start to feel reality rather than think it. You recognize patterns, synchronicities, flows of energy that seem to communicate directly with your awareness. Life becomes participatory again. You are no longer an observer analyzing the world. You are the world experiencing itself through a human lens. This shift from analysis to participation is the essence of deprogramming. It's what McKenna called reclaiming the felt presence of immediate experience. But the process is not linear. The old program resists deletion. It hides in subtle ways, in pride, in ideology, even in the identity of being awakened. The ego can wear spiritual clothing just as easily as corporate attire. It can turn enlightenment into another brand, another mask. So the deprogramming must be continuous. You have to remain vigilant, to keep questioning every belief, even the ones that feel liberating, especially those. The mind loves to replace one mythology with another. True awakening is not about adopting new beliefs. It's about living without the need for belief at all. Language itself can become a form of meditation. When you speak, listen to the energy behind the words. Are you communicating truth, or are you defending an illusion? When you listen to others, can you hear the deeper meaning behind their words? The longing, the fear, the shared humanity beneath the cultural masks. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to practice freedom. The deprogrammed self doesn't argue with reality, it dances with it. And there comes a moment when the process turns inward, toward the final illusion, the belief in separation. As long as you think of yourself as someone deprogramming, you are still inside the loop. The ultimate step is to see that there is no you apart from the universe that is awakening through you. The self dissolves into awareness, and awareness sees itself as everything. Deprogramming becomes indistinguishable from creation, the spontaneous unfolding of life, unmediated by history or hierarchy. You no longer need to rebel against culture because you no longer believe in the distinction between inside and outside. The world is within you, and you are within it. At this stage, language becomes lighter. You stop speaking in absolutes. You stop insisting that your truth must be everyone's truth. You see that reality is infinitely malleable, that every perspective is a facet of the same crystal consciousness exploring itself. The impulse to convert, to preach, to prove, all of it fades. You no longer want to change the world. You want to experience it fully. Paradoxically, this surrender changes everything. When you stop fighting reality, reality begins to evolve through you. You become an instrument for the intelligence of the cosmos to play its own song. McKenna called this state the return to the Gaian mind. It's the awareness that human consciousness is not separate from nature, but an extension of it, a flower blooming from the planet's dreaming. To be deprogrammed is to feel that unity in every breath, every sound, every heartbeat. The trees are no longer background scenery. They are living organs of the same body. The wind is not weather, it is communication. Time is not linear, it's a spiral of unfolding awareness. You begin to live in rhythm with the larger intelligence that has been guiding you all along. Deprogramming doesn't end in detachment, it ends in participation, in the rediscovery of wonder. Once you strip away the cultural filters, existence reveals its true nature. It is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be experienced. You realize that the point of life was never to become perfect, enlightened, or successful. It was to be here, fully, vulnerably, alive. The deprogrammed self is not superior to the programmed one. It's simply free from illusion. It can laugh, love, fail, and feel without the burden of meaning. It moves through the world lightly, as awareness wearing a human costume, knowing that the costume will eventually fall away, but the awareness will not. And perhaps that's the final secret McKenna tried to share, that deprogramming is not a task, but a return. You are not creating freedom. You are remembering it. You are not learning to awaken. You are awakening from the idea that you ever slept. The cultural dream was deep, yes, and its hypnosis powerful, but it never erased the truth of what you are. Beneath every word, beneath every belief, beneath every illusion of I, the original awareness has been waiting, patient, luminous, untouched. The program may be complex, but the silence beneath it is simple. It is the silence before language, before thought, before culture. The silence that is listening to these words right now. That silence is you, and in recognizing it, the last code line of the program dissolves. There is no self left to be deprogrammed, only consciousness, infinite and free, watching the dream fade into light, There is a point, after the old programs have dissolved and the self has thinned to transparency, where something extraordinary begins to happen. It is not the arrival of a new belief or a revelation to be written down, but the quiet rediscovery of a language older than words, a mode of communication woven into the fabric of existence itself. The mind, no longer bound by syntax and symbol, begins to sense meaning directly, not as thought, but as resonance. The real language of the universe does not move through grammar. It moves through vibration, frequency, pattern, and feeling. It is spoken by the stars, by water, by the trembling of your own cells. And though culture buried it beneath centuries of chatter, it has never stopped whispering. McKenna often said that the world is made of language, but what he meant was far deeper than mere semantics. The true language is not linguistic, it's energetic. The cosmos speaks itself into being. Every atom vibrates with a message. Every living thing is a syllable in the vast cosmic sentence of creation. The birds sing not to fill silence, but to modulate the atmosphere. The wind moves through trees not as random noise, but as a continuous transmission, a flowing code of balance and change. We have been deaf to it because our attention has been hijacked by the artificial language of culture, the language of commerce, hierarchy, and abstraction. But once you step beyond that noise, you start to hear the real conversation happening all around you. It doesn't speak in English or Sanskrit or mathematics. It speaks in texture, in rhythm, in symmetry. The spiral of a galaxy, the unfolding of a fern, the pulse of your heartbeat. These are phrases in the universal tongue. They don't mean anything in the cultural sense. They are meaning. They are direct expressions of intelligence without interpretation. To understand them is not to translate them, but to feel them. When you feel the geometry of a snowflake or the golden ratio in a shell, you are reading the syntax of existence itself. It is the language of pattern that connects all things. Humans once spoke this language intuitively. Before civilization imposed its codes, the ancient mind lived in direct conversation with the living world. The shaman didn't analyze nature, he listened to it. The myths of early cultures weren't fantasies. They were metaphors born from communion. When they said the river was a spirit, they weren't mistaken. They were perceiving the vibrational intelligence behind form. The river was alive, aware, and speaking, not in human words, but in the dialect of movement and sound. The tragedy of modernity is that we traded that living language for dead symbols. We reduced the song of being to equations and commodities. But the cosmic language is patient. It waits for silence. It waits for stillness. When the noise of the human mind quiets, it flows back in naturally, like water filling an abandoned vessel. You begin to sense that every event in your life, every encounter, every coincidence is part of an immense and deliberate conversation. Synchronicities are not accidents, they are syntax. The universe is not random, it is responsive. When you align with its rhythm, when your inner frequency harmonizes with its pulse, communication happens effortlessly. You no longer ask for signs, you live within them. McKenna described this as entering the Gaian mind, a participatory intelligence in which nature and consciousness are one process. In that state, thought and environment mirror each other. Your inner landscape shapes the outer, and the outer reflects the inner. Language ceases to be a tool of description and becomes a bridge of co-creation. You speak, and reality responds. Not because you're manifesting in the pop spiritual sense, but because there is no boundary between you and the field that hears you. The vibration of your intention ripples outward into the fabric of being, and the universe rearranges itself accordingly. This is not fantasy, it's physics seen from the inside. Modern science, though still limited by its linguistic reductionism, has begun to glimpse this truth. Quantum entanglement, resonance, and non-locality are hints of a deeper coherence that defies the logic of separation. At the fundamental level, everything communicates with everything else instantaneously. Consciousness is not an observer of this field, it is the field. The ancient mystics called it the Logos, the creative sound, the Word made flesh. In the beginning was vibration, and vibration was awareness. Everything that exists is a modulation of that infinite tone. To speak the real language of the universe, then, is not to invent new words, but to remember how to listen. It requires a shift from intellect to intuition, from analysis to attention. Listening here means surrender, a softening of the ego's need to define. You start to perceive meaning in the curve of clouds, in the rhythm of footsteps, in the way sunlight flickers across a wall. The world becomes a teacher again, speaking through pattern. Every event is a lesson in harmony, every challenge a dissonant chord seeking resolution. Life itself becomes music, and you, if you're quiet enough, become both instrument and listener. At first, this way of perceiving can feel alien, even overwhelming. The rational mind doesn't know how to categorize the experience of direct communion. It demands translation, and in trying to translate, it kills the magic. But if you resist that impulse, if you let the experience stay ineffable, something deeper takes root. You begin to realize that the need to explain is itself a symptom of the old program. Explanation is the ego's way of maintaining control. But understanding, true understanding, comes not through explanation, but through resonance. You don't need to know why the universe sings, only to know that you are part of the song. In this state of resonance, time changes its texture. The future stops feeling like something that's coming toward you, and the past stops feeling like something that's chasing you. Instead, everything unfolds simultaneously, as if existence were improvising itself in real time. The mind slows down, the senses sharpen. A breeze, a sound, a heartbeat becomes infinite in depth. You start to feel that you are being spoken through, that consciousness is expressing itself as you. The words that come out of your mouth, the art you create, the choices you make, all of it flows from that deeper intelligence. You become a translation of the cosmic language into human form. This is why McKenna believed that art, poetry, and psychedelic experience are sacred. They are attempts to give shape to the inexpressible, to bring the invisible language into visible form. True art does not imitate life. It reveals the living code behind it. Every genuine creative act is a moment of translation between dimensions, the universe speaking through the human nervous system. When you paint, when you write, when you make music without agenda, you are not inventing. You are participating in the eternal act of creation. You are the voice of the cosmos discovering itself anew. As this awareness deepens, even suffering begins to transform. Pain is no longer seen as punishment, but as a form of communication. The body speaks through discomfort. The psyche speaks through shadow. The world speaks through challenge. Every difficulty carries a message encoded in vibration, an invitation to realign with the flow. To resist it is to prolong the distortion. To listen is to heal. The real language of the universe is compassionate, but it is uncompromising in its precision. It always tells the truth, even when that truth is painful. Eventually, the line between self and cosmos disappears altogether. You realize that you are not a receiver of the universal language. You are a node of it. The same intelligence that moves the galaxies moves your thoughts, your breath, your heartbeat. There is no distance between the knower and the known. Existence becomes a single act of communication, consciousness speaking to itself through infinite forms. What you once called understanding becomes direct participation. What you once called God becomes the totality of being, expressing itself as sound, color, motion, silence. The irony is that this is not a new revelation. It is the oldest truth, the one known to every mystic who ever dissolved into light. Before culture, before words, before even the concept of meaning, this language was already here. The hum beneath creation, the heartbeat of time. You can't learn it. You can only remember it. And once remembered, it changes everything. You no longer feel alone, because separation was a misunderstanding. You no longer fear death, because vibration does not die. It transforms. You no longer seek purpose, because existence itself is purpose. McKenna called it the felt presence of immediate experience, the moment when the conceptual filters fall away and you meet reality face to face. It's not mystical in the sense of otherworldly. It's utterly ordinary, yet infinitely profound. It's the recognition that the ordinary was the miracle all along. The wind moving through trees, the laughter of strangers, the glimmer of stars. All of it is the universe conversing with itself in real time. You are both the question and the answer, the listener and the song. When this realization settles, you no longer need to escape or ascend or awaken. You realize you were never asleep. The whole drama of programming and deprogramming, of illusion and enlightenment, was part of the cosmic game, the language playing with itself, learning to speak in new ways. Culture was not the enemy, only a temporary dialect. The ego was not the villain, only a translator that forgot it was translating. And now, the translation is complete. The real language of the universe doesn't tell you what to think. It shows you how to feel truth. It moves through you as intuition, creativity, love. It asks for no belief, no doctrine, no authority, only presence. To listen is to awaken. To speak it is to create. To live it is to be free. And so, when McKenna said, "Culture is not your friend," he was pointing you back to the original friendship, the communion between consciousness and creation, the friendship that never ended, only forgotten beneath the noise of history. To remember it is to step back into the music of being. The world is singing to you in every moment. The question is not whether the universe speaks, but whether you are quiet enough to hear it. And when you finally do, when you hear that hum of infinite meaning vibrating through every breath, every atom, every heartbeat, you will know that you have come home. The language was never lost. It was you, waiting to remember how to listen.